Greetings fellow Earthlings, welcome back to Darlingbrough Sci-Fi Builds. In a previous video I did a full review of this mini table saw, and I said that I would be explaining why I bought it. Well, I think it's about time that I explain a few things. Although I haven't been posting any video content here on YouTube for quite a while, I have actually been doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes. One of the projects I have been focusing on is the research and development of building these small fences. Now I know you're probably sitting there looking at them thinking, yeah, but they don't look very sci-fi. And you'd be right. However, the reason I'm building them is as tabletop gaming terrain. As you can see, I've developed many different prototypes for a variety of different options that will become available. The plan is to start selling them both online and through model shops and other retailers as well. So far, the development and effort that I have been putting into these has already started to pay off, with at least one model shop already showing interest. I initially did some research online and found that there was a lot of terrain available, which was either 3D printed or created as a mass-produced product using resin. I decided that I wanted to go against the grain, quite literally, and hand build a product using natural materials and sustainable resources. The design I had in mind was a fairly simple one, a badly maintained fence set on a small platform. The idea being that these fences could be placed almost anywhere and used as barriers or obstacles in a wide variety of tabletop games. I also wanted to make them as generic as possible so that they would appeal to a wide variety of different players. This applied not only to the design but also the size as well. I wanted them to be suitable for a wide range of different scales. For the first batch of bases, I chose to use some 3mm hardboard, which was left over from a previous project. The pieces I had left over were around about 30 centimeters long, or about a foot, and about 4.5 centimeters wide. I started cutting them into quarters using a table saw, and this left me with an initial batch of around about 60 bases to start working on. The last step was to give each of the bases a quick sand using my rotary tool. It was then time to start working on the fences themselves. These fences themselves are built using coffee stirrers, and when I started to build them, I was cutting them individually using a pair of pliers, which, as you can imagine, was taking quite a long time. In order to make sure that the fence panels remained consistent, I built my first jig. However, I was still having to cut each fence panel individually, which, as you can imagine, was very repetitive and very time consuming. Despite this, I stuck with it. I actually found the snapping sound quite satisfying, and soon managed to build up quite a stockpile of cut up coffee stirrers, which I could then use for the fence panels. It was then time to start placing each individual fence panel in a line to create the fence. Again, I used a handmade jig to keep all of the panels aligned at the bottom, before attaching a thin strip of wood along the length of each fence using a small amount of Yoo-hoo glue. Once this had set, I removed each fence from the jig and gave them some additional reinforcement using a small amount of super glue, otherwise known as CA glue. One thing I did notice as I was building the fences, however, was how quickly I was going through the fence panels. I found that I had to replenish my stock of chopped coffee stirrers pretty often, and this was bringing the production to a crawl. It was at that point I decided to invest in this small table saw. Rather than trying to cut each coffee stirrer individually, I carefully taped a pile of them together and then ran them through the mini table saw. What a massive difference this made. Depending on how many coffee stirrers I taped together, I was able to increase the fence panel production by probably about 1,000%. In the time I originally took to cut down one coffee stirrer, I found I was able to get through at least 20 or more. Despite the poor review I gave my mini table saw, for this purpose it was doing exactly what I wanted. With the fence panels now in plentiful supply, I was able to forge ahead and start mass producing the fences. The first step was to attach the completed fences to the bases using a hot glue gun. Once the hot glue had cooled down and solidified, I then checked each individual fence to make sure that everything had been attached securely. As each fence was being built individually, it occurred to me that I could start offering a customized version of each of the fences. I chose to create 3 different fence options. A full fence, where pretty much all of the panels are still attached. A damaged fence option, where most of the panels are intact. And a useless fence option, where the fence has basically been more or less destroyed. With the wooden fundamentals now complete, it was time for me to make the fences look more realistic by adding texture and terrain. In order to add some realism, I wanted to apply a mud texture to the base. The idea was that this mixture would become the underlying layer, so even when grass or other scenic materials are added, they'll be added on top. I was careful to make sure that the mixture completely covered the base and was pushed between any gaps in the fences. This made the fences appear to be actually sticking out of the ground and not just plonked on top. It was then time to leave it all to dry. Once the muddy texture paste had dried, it was then time to apply colour. I wanted to make everything look like mud, so my initial plan was to spray them all using my airbrush. Whilst this idea was good in theory, the airbrush was perfect if I was building a one-off model. However, when it came to mass producing these fences, it was taking far too long to get a decent coverage. I switched tactics and, using some masking tape, taped off all of the fences before hitting them with some brown spray paint. I realised that applying paint using the spray paint rather than an airbrush was so much quicker. Not only did the spray paint give a wonderful consistent colour, but the satin finish made the mud look slightly wet once the paint had dried, which was perfect for one of my finishes, which I'll come to in a few moments. The spray paint I decided on using in the end was the Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch with a satin finish in espresso brown. Once the spray paint had dried, it was then time to carefully peel away all of the masking tape to reveal fences sticking out of beautiful wet mud. The bases looked absolutely amazing, But I must admit, the fences themselves now looked really bland and bare. I needed to paint them as well. I decided that to paint the fences, an oil wash would be the best solution. Not only was it going to be quick to apply, but it would bring out the natural grain of the wood coffee stirrers as well. Now I will admit that when I was creating my prototypes, I started by painting the fences before attaching them to the base. However, I think that for the manufacturing process, attaching everything together and then painting it all at the same time is the more efficient way of doing it. Now if you are interested in oil washes, I have actually created a couple of videos here on the channel showing some of the do's and don'ts. And what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description below. Check them out after you've finished watching this video. Once all of my blanks had been painted and everything had dried, it was then time to start turning them into terrain, using the scenic materials I had. During my initial research and development stages, I decided that I was going to be offering different variations for the fences. Mudslide, a wet, muddy looking texture. All wet mud, all of the time. No weeds or plants. Just be careful, you don't want to slip. Now, as I mentioned before, I realised that effectively all of these, which are blanks, are also the mudslide option as well. Because of the satin finish, the mud looks nice and wet, and once the fences are painted, that is effectively what the mudslide option is. Dried mud, a dry looking muddy texture. No weeds or bushes. Although the mud has dried, the greenery still hasn't resurfaced. For the dry mud versions, I needed to apply some more paint over the bases. I played around with different colours, but eventually settled on dark earth and khaki brown, both from Vallejo. I first painted the dark earth all over the bases, and then used khaki brown to create some highlights. I allowed the paint to dry, and then gave all of the bases a coat of clear matte varnish, in order to take the shine off the models, as well as make them more durable for when they will be used. Meadow, a vibrant green grass finish, comes with some small bushes or green weeds growing at the bottom of the fence. Thinking about meadows got me thinking about big sweeping green hills, and I kind of wanted to recreate that and give the illusion of a green grass finish, so I turned to some of my flocking material. These are perfect for creating natural looking scenery. Not only can different shades usually be mixed to create variations, you can create the illusion of shadows or highlights. I started by applying a coat of PVA glue to the base, and then applying Heath Green Scatter by Jarvis along the bottom of the fences to try and create the illusion of shadows. I followed up by applying a slightly lighter flock, Green Blended Turf by Woodland Scenics, over the rest of the base. The next step was to add a few bushes and weeds. To do this, I used a few blobs of PVA glue and then some small pieces of clump foliage in dark green and some light green coarse turf, both products from Woodland Scenics, to create highlights and small weeds. After all of this was added, I gave the fences a spray with some isopropanol to break the surface tension of the materials, before applying some watered down PVA glue to seal everything down and fix it in place. After leaving the fences to dry overnight, I then sprayed them all with a healthy coat of clear matte varnish for extra protection and durability. The end result looked absolutely beautiful. Summer grass. A more yellow grass finish. Comes with some small bushes or green weeds growing at the bottom of the fence. The inspiration for summer grass came from seeing fields full of wheat and grass which had generally dried in the sun, and I wanted to try and recreate this yellow grass finish. In order to achieve this, I pretty much followed the same steps as before, using more yellow flocking materials. Once the bases were covered in PVA, I dunked them in earth blend flocking from Woodland Scenics before sprinkling some sand coloured scatter from Jarvis all over the outside edges of the bases. As before, I then applied some small clumps of coarse turf on the ground to give the illusion of different undergrowth or weeds. Once the flocking stage had been completed, I gave them a spritz of isopropanol and watered down PVA, as before, to stick everything in place. Once all of this had dried, the final touch was the clear matte varnish to add additional resilience to the bases. Once again, they turned out absolutely beautifully, ready to place on a table and play. Desert sand. A dry, sandy finish. Usually comes with small rocks at the bottom of the fence. The inspiration for desert sand was pretty obvious. I wanted to create a sandy desert texture. What more can I say? Again, I used a similar method to create the bases. However, instead of using commercially available modelling supplies, I chose materials sourced from the DIY industry and chose to use a mixture of fine and slightly more coarse sand instead. I started with the PVA and then covered the base with my own batch of fine sand. In order to create some variation, I then sprinkled another DIY sand with slightly more coarse grain over the top. I dabbed a few spots of PVA glue on the bases and then placed small stones into the PVA. This gave the illusion of small rocks or boulders, which added more visual interest and realism to the fences. With all of the sand in place, I sprayed the fences with the isopropanol and covered them in the watered down PVA mixture to make sure that everything remained in place. When these fences had dried off, I'll be honest, my initial reaction was one of disappointment. In my opinion, they just didn't look as effective as the other fences that I'd made. So I decided to try giving the sand bases a dry brushing to see if I could improve them. Again, I chose the Ivory by Vallejo, and almost instantly the sand looked so much better than it had previously. I followed this up with a highlight using white, and this just lifted the edges up even more. Although it was a very subtle effect, it was enough to make the difference without being too over the top. I allowed the paint to dry before I gave the fences a final coat of the clear matte varnish to make sure everything was ready to go. So there we have it, a full range of terrain fences aimed for the tabletop gaming market, which I am looking to try and sell either online or through local model retailers. So it'd be really interesting to know, what are your thoughts on these fences? Is this a product that you would be interested in bringing to your tabletop gaming? Do you have any suggestions or feedback on how it could be improved? Or perhaps any more variations you think I should be building? Now, I do appreciate all of your feedback and suggestions, So please leave all of your comments down below. And also, if you want to order some of these, then by all means get in touch. The details and information will be in the description as well. And of course, if you run or own a model shop and you feel that these would be a product that your shop would be able to sell, then please get in touch as well. I will be taking trade inquiries. Again, all the details are down below. These fences are hopefully going to be the start of multiple terrain and scenery products that I am aiming to build and sell. However, I am also creating other merchandise as well, such as t-shirts, hoodies, stickers and other products. So if you want to help support me, then please check out all the links below. Order some products through my Buy Me a Coffee page, and of course like and subscribe to this channel. In the meantime, check out some other videos that I've made, and hasta la vista, I'll be back.